with each new set, enters 204 brand new cards to the Disney Lorcana metagame. Most of the cards you can look at and say, hey, they're duds, they're probably just good for limited. And then there's, of course, the cards that are extraordinary and are a threat to any metagame. But today, I'm here to discuss those cards that fall in the in-between. Cards that you probably have seen in some deck list already, but you're not really sure if it's for you or if it was actually good. Today, we're going to discuss these cards that I honestly believe are potential meta-defining cards that you're going to find more and more as the weeks develop into the Inklands. So let's take a moment, really discuss some of the more game-breaking cards that you're probably not playing yet. Perdita, Devoted Mother, is a 6-cost, uninkable, 1 strength, 6 willpower, 2 lore with the ability Come Along Children. When you play this character, and whenever she quests, you may play a character with 2 cost or less from your discard for free. Perdita really is a new and astounding character in the game because there are no characters that have this particular ability. Now, if you're ever played any other type of card game, you would know that any ability that brings back characters from the discard pile is truly something to not balk at. This ability to come into play, specifically target what you need, and really build your deck around Come Along Children and the ability of this character can make for a much better deck. Of the past, we've seen characters like Mufasa be built around decks, but realistically, Mufasa is relying on the luck of the draw. He's relying on the fact that when he is removed, you will gain incremental value of his ability. But for Perdita, we don't need to worry about what we may get. It's about what we're going to choose. And because you have the ability to always know what your destination target will be for Come Along Children, it ends up being a much better build around character and a much more playable character in itself. The fact that this character can come into play as a 1/6 with 2 lore and return a character like Simba or Pinocchio to grant you a 3 lore character, or bring back a card like Stitch to better present up your Stitch Rockstar lines as a shiftable target, or even Kita, who has the ability to also be a potential shift target. There are so many ways that you can truly utilize the ability of Come Along Children that it would make for a much better deck overall in your deck building success. Can you include a character like Mufasa? Sure. But if we're building a deck that's reliant on 2-cost characters and all different types of abilities from them, I think that Mufasa probably falls down the scale and isn't as nearly as playable. All in all, I do think Perdita is a potential staple in the metagame to come. Her ability to recover from board wipes is remarkable, and the fact that you have to answer the character, because if you do not, when she quests, you also just get to put a card back into play, which means you can go and get another Simba or another Kaida just to be able to bodyguard the Perdita, which means for even more triggers. Truly a phenomenal card, and I really look forward to seeing what this card and the damage that it's going to do in the metagame to come. Chernabogs Followers is a brand new 1-cost inkable, 2 strength, 1 willpower, 1 lore, with the ability of Restless Soul. Whenever this character quests, you may banish them to draw a card. What I'd really like to discuss about the 1-cost and 2-cost characters moving forward is that we lived in a metagame in Rise of the Floodborn where everyone understood that if you didn't have 3 willpower or more, you were probably just an unplayable card that was going to be too easily removed, and you didn't really want to ever be behind in board presence. I personally don't feel that this is true anymore. I think we can get away with playing cards that have 1 willpower, that have 2 willpower, especially when they have unique abilities that you can really utilize in other means. Just like the character I mentioned before with Perdita, this card can just simply be a quest, draw a card, and then later on in the game, pick it back up as a 2/1 quester that can quest and draw you a card again later in the game. But it also has other utilizations through cards like Montanui. Montanui is the 2-cost, 1 to move to, 5 willpower location that reads whenever a character is banished while here, it becomes an ink instead. Chernabogs Followers, you're able to then quest, utilize the ability of Restless Souls to when this does quest, banish it to draw a card, and then compound that with Montanui, you get to also gain an ink. This is a new type of line of a deck that we really haven't seen a lot of success from. In the last metagame, there were no Amethyst Sapphire decks to make any top eights of any of the major events, but this one little niche play could be an option for deck builders to really go after. Of course, this character really is just good as a standalone filler character. If we compare it to a card like Zimba Future King, that has the ability to loot, as we say, which is when you play this, draw a card, then discard a card. It's very similar in that regards of when you quest with this card, you have the ability to discard Chernabogs Followers to then gain a card in your hand. It's really useful for certain decks that are really trying to find a given card on a given turn. As an example of the past, Emerald decks were really focused on finding Prince John or Bucky, things like that, that you really want to play early on in the game to make the impact felt. This is a very good option for this too, is that you can play this card, quest with it, gain your lore, draw your card, and give yourself one more shot of hitting your curve the best way you know how. Kit Cloudkicker, the tough guy. 3 cost, inkable, 2 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore, with the ability of sky surfing. When you play this character, you may return chosen opposing character with 2 strength or less to their player's hand. Yesterday, I put out a poll asking players what the most impactful card was out of the 4 options that you're actually going to see on this list. And Kit Cloudkicker came in at number 1. And I have to probably agree with you guys. Kit Cloudkicker really is an answer to cards that people didn't really think we were going to have from an ink that didn't have it. The fact that he's inkable is really, truly remarkable. But being able to, on the draw, answer cards like Ursula is really phenomenal. And my favorite thing about this is that this character's mere presence in your hand causes your opponent to alter their entire gameplay. I had a game the other day at League where my opponent played a Ursula 2 cost and it revealed that I had a Cloud Kicker in my hand. And because of that, on turn 3, rather than playing their Ursula, they actually just inked it. And right there alone, I could say that this card was worth everything it says it is. Being able to completely alter your opponent's gameplay just because a card exists in your hand is a true potential staple to the metagame. I think this is a card that people were going to be like, oh, I'm going to play a couple of them and they're going to be good. They're going to bounce, bodyguards like Kaida and Zimba. They're going to be able to bounce Ursula. They're going to be able to bounce, hooks and Erics and all these things like back to people's hands. And we're going to get a lot of value and it's going to be okay. I'll just play a couple of them. I think that this card is going to end up being a 4 of in most Emerald decks. It's going to be really that powerful. It's that game altering. It plays into the removal package of which Emerald is already offering you through Mother's Knows Best. But this guy is a 3 cost inkable that when you don't need them, you get rid of them. And when you can play them, the tempo swings are potentially massive. So all in all, I think this card is going to be one of the absolute staples of the metagame. If you haven't put them in your Emerald decks yet, you definitely need to put them there. If you have 1 or 2, I think you can make your deck better by going to 3 or 4. I'd like to talk about locations for a moment. I think there are a lot of players out there that haven't really grasped the understanding of how powerful even just a vanilla location is to the game state. I think a card like Neverland on the play is a really powerful card. Having this 1 cost with 4 willpower that gains you passive lore really can net you 2, 3, maybe even 4 lore from an inkable state. There are so many decks that rely on characters like Lilo or Maleficent, maybe even Cursed Merfolk now, where they're an uninkable card that you're hoping you can get 2 to 4 lore out of, and that's all great and dandy. But the real truth here is that Neverland might almost always get you 2 to 4 lore. And if it doesn't passively gain you 2 or 4 lore, What it absolutely does is take lore away from your opponent. It forces them to answer your location, or you're just going to consistently gain passive lore. And what that really does to a metagame is that it forces your opponent into making decisions. And every single time your opponent makes the decision whether or not to challenge your location, to gain lore for themselves, is really just another edge that you can make in gameplay. Forcing your opponent to make more decisions likely means them having the better chance of making a play mistake. So, this is a type of mechanic in the game now that locations offer you. This ability to consistently create a different play line for any opponent really gives you the opportunity to capitalize on mistakes. Maybe it's to utilize your challenger characters better. Maybe it's to utilize your rush characters better. There are so many different ways and lines to present this, the where your opponent having to have the right answers to your style of deck can go a long way within your own deck building and really increase your odds of winning games, just simply capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes. I know it looks simple, I know it looks plain, just having this generic willpower with no text box, but a static one lore with a high willpower early on in the game really can develop into several lore. And if your opponent doesn't answer it and doesn't respect it, what's the worst that can happen here? You just gain 6 or 7 lore from your location? I think eventually your opponent's going to catch on and they're going to realize that that was also the mistake, which is really all about the different gameplay styles of locations, creating defining moments in the games that your opponent really has to make an educated choice. And sometimes they don't know the answer. And that's 100% to your benefit. What are you guys thinking so far about locations? I'd love to know in the comments. Are you loving them? Are you hating them? Do you think they're good enough? Me personally, I think they are better than anyone really expected. A lot through the mechanics of just reading the card was very difficult during the spoiler season. It was very hard to register if they were going to be good enough. I think they over deliver. I'm really happy for locations. I think they're a wonderful mechanic to the game. I also thought they were really good for limited play. So lots of the kind of like the thumbs up all around for locations. Of course, if you are enjoying this video so far, hit that like button for me. If you like information like this, we do videos like this all the time. Make sure you hit subscribe. Let's get into the rest of the cards. Stitch Little Rocket is a 2-cost, uninkable Ruby character with 3 strength, 1 willpower, 1 lore, and rush. Yep, looks plain, looks boring, looks generic. However, 3 strength on a 2-cost character with rush honestly is pretty dominant. And in a world where there are more locations out there, this is kind of the perfect character for them. In the Rise of the Floodborn metagame, 3 willpower characters was a pretty dominant stat line for most of it. So this is a card that very early on in the Into the Inklands metagame may punish people that haven't really adapted and aren't respecting the fact that you can just have a Ruby character for 2 costs that can come in and remove cards. I'm not really a fan of letting my opponent sing with Ursula. I'm very much trying to build decks that prevent that from happening, but not every deck is going to have an answer to it. And Ruby is one of those decks that really doesn't. So presenting a card like Stitch Little Rocket to let your opponent sing once with Ursula, do their thing, do all these broken, ridiculous combos is fine if you can just back it up with a 2-cost removal. So you're still under curve and you can still develop your board in some other way, whether it's moving a card to a location, maybe it's playing another character along with Stitch, Little Rocket to still develop. There are definitely some options that you have, but all in all, I think this card is going to come in. It's going to be impactful. If there are more locations hitting play early, if your opponent is playing a card like Forbidden Mountain or Nottingham or Montanui, Stitch Little Rocket is a good way to come in, put some damage on it quickly, and then if they don't have a character to follow up, your Stitch Little Rocket is actually going to be able to remove that location pretty freely. And then he just has 3 willpower. So a lot of answers for him in the form of characters really trade poorly into the character, which is great. You just get a lot of value out of this. He's a really good, solid location killer, which is awesome. And he just might just end up getting you a casual couple lore as well. I really think Stitchlow Rocket is a pretty big, impactful character moving forward in the metagame, and it's definitely a card that's worth your uninkable slots early. And if you haven't yet, I give him a try. Heart of Tafiti is a 3 cost inkable item for Sapphire with the ability of Create Life. Exert this, pay 2 ink, put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down, and exert it. We just came from a format that every Sapphire deck that really was successful played around the card Fishbone Quill. Now, you may be wondering, why is Heart of Tafiti even remotely better than Fishbone Quill? And I think my truthful, honest answer is because of the way the metagame is developed. Having cards like Ursula and cards like Bare Necessities really dampering on your hand makes Fishbone Quill all the more worse. Also notable that you can't rely on even having your a whole new world to bring you back to cards in your hand to even further utilize Fishbone Quill. You really have to pay the extra ink here to utilize the top of your deck instead, so you're not hindering your cards from your hand. Right now, being able to reliably play out Fishbone Quill and utilize all the cards in your hand might actually put you in a worse position in the game if you don't have a way to refill your hand. And now that there are so many cards to interact with items, actions, and songs through Bare Necessities and through Ursula, it's really difficult to kind of get any type of advantage successfully off those things. Not to mention, there's been an uptick of Bucky and Floodborne characters that are forcing your hand down the size, along with honestly, a card like Sudden Chill with just an Ursula. If you don't have an answer to Ursula and they sudden chill you, your Fishbone Quill just gets worse and worse. I think Heart Tafiti is the new best card for ramp decks. Utilizing Heart Tafiti, utilizing Mickey Mouse Detective is still the better way to go if that's what you're trying to do for the ramp style. And then along came Zeus. Yes, I know this is probably the most duh on this list, but what I find pretty amazing is there are so many decks that I've seen that aren't playing this card, or they're not playing this card in higher numbers. And I really want to know why. I think And Then Along Came Zeus as a 4 cost, uninkable song that is for steel, that reads deal 5 damage to chosen character or location, is potentially one of the best songs in the game. Now, I know we're used to playing cards that cost 3 or that cost 5, and we really haven't yet in the game had a 4 cost song that was even that good. And maybe that comes with the territory of, well, my 4 cost characters aren't really that successful. I'm not really a big fan of them. I mean, that's all fine. We can have that argument. But if it makes a card like Jafar Dreadnought have another option, if it makes a card like Donald Duck, Perfect Gentleman, have another option. Um, any of your generic shift targets normally cost 4 or more, so we're still able to shift and then shift and play. And then along came Zeus to remove threats from the board. Doing 5 damage to a location, to most locations, is just a really phenomenal stat. Like to hit, the amount of characters this removes on curve is really phenomenal. The obvious ones so far are Jafar, Striking Illusionist, which we've seen an uptick in play. It can still one-shot Rapunzel's. It can take down the new legendary Kaidas. Majority of the Sapphire cards all have 6 willpower, so it's not a one-for-one trade there. Majority of your Amethyst cards we can take down with one shot. In a steel deck, dealing with Ursula has always been a problem. So one single song that can do 5 damage to Ursula can go a long way. It just has so much utility and so much use that I think that the 4 cost uninkable is really making it look bad. But I think the lines that you can create for yourself in deck building through this card really outweigh that cost. And it really does merit the uninkable nature of it. Not to mention having a versatility of spot removal and a complementary amount of area of effect removal, like Grab Your Swords or like Tinkerbell, really can say, hey, maybe I just don't need 4 grab your swords anymore. I can fit a couple more Along Came Zeus in my deck. I think it's one of those that this card we're going to see develop over the course of the metagame be one of the most powerful cards within it. So some of the honorable mentions here are cards that are likely closer to the duh, this is a threat to the metagame, but are still cards I'm not certain many people have really understood. When Morph was first revealed, I was not the biggest fan of it because of the current metagame of Rise of the Floodborn meant that there were so many actions and songs and ways to really remove Morph before you'd ever get the effect. But now, as we see a fully developed Into the Inklands set, I think Morph is a wonderful character that is a gigantic threat to the metagame. Because, in all honesty, if your opponent is wasting resources to remove Morph, it just means your Ursula is very more likely to run free. And that's a really powerful line. But the other thing that Morph does, ironically, is the card next to it. Robin Hood, Sheriff of Nottingham, is one of those cards that if you haven't played with this card yet, if you're like, oh, it's a legendary, I don't feel like buying it, it's too expensive, I promise you're going to lose to this card. The other day, my first event that I played with Into the Inklands, I played an Emerald Steel deck playing both of these cards, and Robin Hood, Sheriff of Nottingham probably won me half my games himself. A 3/6 that can come in, remove just about every character in the game for 3 or less, and still stick around with a sufficient amount of willpower, along with you also gain 2 lore. Incredible. And then, of course, like when they have to go to get rid of him, he just replaces himself by drawing you a card. Card's phenomenal. Definitely, in my opinion, a staple in every single steel deck in the game. I can't think of a reason to not be playing Robin Hood. Dead ass serious. I think it's phenomenal. I think the 1 cost Robin Hood is great. I think the 2 cost Robin Hood is another wonderful option that you can be utilizing. Completely great card. You should be playing it. The Bare Necessities is the last one here. I'm seeing a lot of Amber decks that are not utilizing the Bare Necessities, which I don't understand. I think the Bare Necessities, honestly, in a world where you don't have a lot of great answers to Ursula or to Ruby threats, to any of these songs that can really punish you, Bare Necessities is a wonderful way to just say, all right, I'm going to get out in front of this. I'm going to take away your best card in your hand that is against me, and then force you into drawing a second one, or I'm just going to win the game. I think Bare Necessities is a card that, as an inkable, you should be playing 3 or 4 of these in every single Amber deck that you're building. My honest hot take, guys. Let me know how you feel about the cards on this list. Do you think I'm missing one? Personally, I think there's a couple more that I can't wait to talk about that I think are very good, and I'm waiting to see if they really do hit the full scope of the metagame, because I do think that there's more gems than what I did, but I didn't want this video to be a million years long. So hopefully you get some good information from this one. You can utilize these cards in your deck building, make your decks a little bit better, and really utilize just all of the wonderful effects that you can from these cards. Some of them are really good. Some of them combo really well with decks that are already out there. And some of them have even created brand new decks in themselves. I really enjoy the Into the Inklands metagame thus far. I think it's going to be a really fun couple of weeks as we see it develop over and over again, because there are so many cards that really might be like in a position where they're very good, but they're only good if the metagame hits a certain state. And I know that's kind of like next level thinking, but it's really weird. But sometimes you actually have to like push the brakes on certain cards because they're not there yet and they're not good enough yet. But the moment that the metagame hits a certain position, those cards start to look like even better threats to it. So all in all, I really hope you guys enjoyed it today. If you didn't see it yet, the meta report is live. We're going to be doing that every single week. Lastly, if you're hard here, you haven't yet, smash the like button, hit subscribe. This coming Saturday, I'm going to be streaming a Enchanted tournament. That's going to be a constructed event at the Encounter Comics and Games. So if you're not yet, you should follow me on Twitch. Link right here, also in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next one.